So let's talk about Biomutant. Is it any good? Well, that's what I'm going to try and answer for you in this video. And hey, if you enjoy the video, please consider clicking that little red subscribe button just down below. It really helps out smaller channels like mine, and I'd really appreciate it. So then, what is Biomutant exactly? Well, it's an open world action RPG where you play as a mutant, who came to be through all of the pollution that humans created a long time ago. It's got a lot of combat, exploration, looting, crafting, and of course tons and tons of quests. Its combat is somewhat similar to the Devil May Cry series, Nier, or something like Bayonetta, while its open world kind of works in a similar way to something like Assassin's Creed, you know, with forts to take over, side quests and secrets to find, all that kind of stuff. You're also able to get things like different mounts to ride around the world, learn various abilities, and loot everything you can get your paws on. And something of note actually, this game was created by a really small development studio from Sweden called Experiment 101. They were actually bought by THQ Nordic in 2017. The studio is headed up by the former game director of Avalanche Studios, who worked on games like Just Cause and Mad Max. I've never really been into the Just Cause games, but I really did love the 2015 Mad Max game. I thought it was really good despite having a few little flaws here and there. But in regards to Biomutant, I have played it for around 25 hours and I've completed the main story and seen the credits roll. I've also done a ton of the side stuff. But if you consider the date that this review was posted, which will be the 24th of May, you might be thinking, hang on a sec, the game's not out until the 25th. Well, I gotta be honest and give you guys the full story. I actually got this game early. Biomutant officially releases, as I said, on the 25th, but I got my copy on the 21st. And before you ask, no, this game wasn't given to me for free, it's not a review copy or anything like that. It's just I pre-ordered it from an online store and they sent it to me early for some reason. I'm not sure why they did, but they sent it to me early. And funnily enough, I actually got a copy of Shin Megami Tensei 3 in the same delivery, which is also not out till the 25th. So again, I don't know why it worked out this way, but it did. I actually posted about it on my Instagram. If you want to follow me there, there's a link in the description down below. But I'm not going to say which store it was that I ordered it from, just because I don't want to get anyone in trouble. But I'll just say it was not Amazon. So there you go. Anyway, now you kind of know what the game is and how I ended up playing it early. So let's talk about what I think the game does right, and then we'll talk about the stuff that I'm not so happy with after that. So first off, I was really impressed by how the world and the different environments look. It's set in a kind of post-apocalyptic world where humans ruined the earth with pollution, but despite that, it's really very colourful. There's a lot of really bright, vibrant colours that just pop off the screen at you. It's really nice to look at. Of course, when it's raining and when it's nighttime in the game, it's not quite as vibrant, but it's still cool. Obviously, you're watching this on YouTube probably, and this won't really come across that well, but when you're playing it on a good TV or a monitor, trust me, it looks really great in person. There are a few low-res textures here and there on things like rocks and some buildings, but I think overall it looks great. I mean, you have to remember, this is actually a PS4 and Xbox One game. There is no dedicated PS5 or Series X version, so when you consider that, I think the environmental artists did a brilliant job on this. Performance-wise, it gets a little bit murky. So I'm playing on a PS5 and it has the option to target 30 FPS or 60 FPS, and I believe this option exists on the PS4 Pro and the Xbox One X versions as well. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I think it does. On my PS5, I did notice frame drops here and there, as well as some micro stuttering when exploring the open world. It seems to happen when you're moving quite fast through the open world, if you're sprinting or using a mount or something like that. I imagine it's because the game is loading in assets as you move, but considering this happens on my PS5, I don't know how well the PS4 Pro or even a base PS4 is going to handle this game. Maybe it runs okay, maybe it doesn't. I don't know because I'm playing on a PS5. Resolution-wise, it seems like from what I've heard, the PS5 version is actually at 1080p, whereas the Series X version can run at 4K. But again, from what I've heard, the PS5 version of 4K had some stability issues, so they've disabled it. Of course, I've played all of this game before the actual release date, so there could be some, day one patch or something that changes things, so that's something to be aware of. I think that the amount of loot that you find has been balanced pretty well. It doesn't seem like you have endless amounts of crap to sift through to find the stuff you want, but it also feels like you get enough to give you some good customization options. There's just a good balance all round there. The loot itself is a bit of a different story, but I will get to that later on. But yeah, you're given a lot of options, and you can improve your loot by simply investing materials in it or by bolting add-ons onto the item, which is a pretty cool system. As an example, you could get a chest piece of a certain quality and then upgrade that quality with materials you've collected at an upgrade bench. And then you can bolt on various items to increase its stats further. The stats on these add-ons generally give more armor or an increase to your health or a higher crit rate, things like that. You can even build weapons completely from scratch by adding parts together that give you the bonuses that you want to have. It's honestly a really cool system, and I quite enjoyed looting all the different parts and tinkering with the gear and weapons. It was just fun to do. And I think the last thing I want to talk about in this section is simply just exploring the world. Not only does it look great, there's just so much to find. You can't go around the world for very long without finding something that distracts you, and that's a good thing. The way you explore the world feels very natural, like you're actually discovering things in a real world rather than just moving through a man-made sandbox, if that makes any sense to you. As I say, the world just feels really natural, and I personally never had a moment where the landscape wasn't interesting to me. In some open world games, everything begins to feel kind of false at a certain point, kind of like window dressing, almost like you're living in The Truman Show, which is a great movie by the way. But you know what I mean, it starts to feel fake sometimes, and I never really felt that way with this game. You know, rock formations and the grass, the rivers, the trees, and even the ruins of the man-made buildings all feel naturally placed and, again, realistic and just lived in. And I think the art team that worked on the environment should really be praised for what they did with this game. It looks absolutely great. But now, unfortunately, we need to move into the stuff that I felt the game did not do so well. Really, my biggest issue with Biomutant is the combat, but there are some caveats to this, and I'll try to explain it the best I can. So I started the game as a sort of tanky character with a two-handed sword, you know, kind of like a great sword, I suppose. It felt okay at first, but after about 2 hours of playing and getting to know the mechanics of the combat, I started to feel like something was a bit off, and I couldn't really put my finger on what it was. It really was hard to explain, and come to think of it, I struggled to explain it to my friends as well. Basically, it feels kinda floaty and imprecise, kinda messy. You feel like you don't have a lot of control over what you're really doing, at least with melee weapons. The guns and abilities feel fine for the most part, but the melee stuff felt very off to me. However, as I said, I was using a greatsword, which, you know, by its nature is quite a slow weapon, which probably didn't help the feeling. Plus the fact that, as far as I can tell, you can't cancel out of a melee attack to dodge. You have to wait for the swing to fully finish before you can roll away. That, coupled with the slower weapon speed, and the fact that some enemies just don't give you much room to breathe at all, it started to feel really unpleasant to control. Having said all that, during the late game I actually switched to a one-handed weapon after speaking to a friend of mine, and honestly it feels far better to control. It's much snappier and quicker. Obviously, because the weapon is a quicker weapon, right? But it just got rid of that real sluggish feeling. It feels like the greatsword type weapons or the hammers haven't really been tuned enough for the way the enemies work. They feel too slow, which is not good in a game like this. And I also switched up the gun I was using from a single shot kind of sniper rifle thing to an auto rifle type gun, and it was absolutely shredding some of the enemies. So I think the combat and its quality is kind of dependent on the weapons you use and the setup you go for. I just think it could use some tweaking and tightening up to make everything feel better. But I suppose if you decide to get this game and you feel like the combat just isn't doing it for you, try switching your weapons up. For me, it really did help, so that's something to be aware of. And while we're on the subject of combat, another thing that bothered me was the way enemies behave. It's not the worst thing, and it's definitely not a deal breaker, but enemies in these kind of action games really need some kind of obvious tell for when they're going to attack you. I personally found that a lot of the time it was very difficult to tell when an attack was coming. They do put a little marker above their heads, sort of like in the Mad Max game or Batman Arkham, but that's kind of the problem. It doesn't really appear during the wind-up animation. It seems to appear pretty much as the attack hits you, so unless you have some amazing reaction time, you might find it a little bit frustrating. However, again, switching from a two-handed weapon to a one-handed weapon actually made this feel better, so keep that in mind. A lot of the enemies don't really give you much time to breathe either. They just keep attacking on and on and on, even after you've done a perfect dodge, which you may see in some of the gameplay. It's where you dodge at specifically the right time and it enters like a slow motion section, which is when you're supposed to try and counterattack. However, when you try to do that, they just keep attacking you anyway, so it kind of feels like you don't get your counterattack. This isn't something that happens 100% of the time. It really depends what attack the enemy's using, but it can be, again, a little frustrating. It just often felt a lot easier and more efficient to just stand back and shoot them in relative safety. I mean, pretty much every hit you take will stagger you or knock you down, which again adds to the frustration. It's kind of really hard to explain it, but if you play the game yourself, you'll probably understand what I mean. When an action game makes you feel like engaging in close combat isn't worth it, I feel like that's a bit of an issue. And I didn't play on the hardest difficulty at all, but I can only imagine how frustrating this combat would be at that level. Again though, I will stress this might be a person by person thing. I just found it a little bit annoying here and there. I would like to not be knocked down every single time I take a hit, that's all. The only other complaint I really have is that I didn't really find any of the loot very interesting. The loot system itself is cool. I really liked the actual act of looting the stuff and then building weapons. You know, that was quite fun and they're all visually pretty cool. But the armor you wear looks so weird, and I think it's because of the way your character's body is modeled. I mean, look at this thing. What is that? It's kind of scary, honestly. And okay, I kinda like the duck helmet, I'm not gonna lie. But what I found was generally I wasn't too happy with the looks of the gear. I guess you could explain it away by pointing out that all the gear you find is like discarded stuff from the humans that used to live in this area, which is why it looks the way it does. I suppose that's something. But I was really hoping for some cool armor sets, you know, like the one has on the cover art. I mean, there were a few bits and pieces I liked, like the duck helmet for example, but you're kind of chained to the stats a little bit. There is no transmog system that I could find in the game, so if you want higher stats, you just gotta wear the stuff with the best numbers, not the stuff you like the look of. And again, not a deal breaker, but making my character cool in an RPG is kind of a big part of it for me, and I think a lot of people, so it's a bit of a shame that you can't really choose how you look to any real extent. But again, someone else could look at the armor and gear in this game and say it looks really cool, so again, that's probably down to personal taste. So now you know what the game is, and I've explained the things I really liked and the things I didn't like so much. But would I actually recommend it? Considering the small team that created it and the fact that this was that team's first game, I really think they deserve some credit. I really do. The game is perfectly fine, and I think it's worth playing if you like open world games at all. Is it perfect? Well, no, it's not. But not everything has to be an absolute masterpiece to be enjoyable. One thing I will point out though is that this game has been marketed as a full price title, and I'm not so sure that's a good idea. I feel like it might go against it a little bit. I'm not sure how much influence or control the developers have over the pricing, but I really do think that £50 or $60 in the US is a bit too much for this. I think full price is asking a little bit too much for it. See, I got my physical copy for around £35, and at that price, I think it's well worth the money. I honestly think if you can get it for around £35 to £40, or I guess, you know, $45 or $50 in the US, then it's well worth playing for that price. The developer themselves have said that the main story can pretty much be finished in around 10 to 12 hours if you really make a point to only do the mainline quests. As I said, I have about 25 hours in the game, and there's still a ton more side stuff to do, so I think, as I said, if you can get it for that lower price, there's plenty to do in it, plenty of content, and it's fun enough that I think it's worth the money. So in closing, it's a perfectly playable game that does have some issues, but they never ruined the game for me. Did they drag it down in places? Sure, but overall it's a fun time, and I hope it sells well, I honestly do, because I'd be really interested to see what this studio could do in the future with more staff and a bigger budget. So there you go, I hope you enjoyed this review of Biomutant, and I'm trying to get the channel up to 100 subscribers at the moment, so if you found this video useful, please consider subscribing to the channel and helping us reach that 100 sub goal. As I said earlier, things like that just help smaller channels like mine get seen, and I'd really appreciate the help. If you have the time, please check out Pyro Games. They're an online retro game seller here in the UK. There will be a direct link to the store in the description box down below, along with a discount code that you can use, and a disclaimer letting you know that I don't receive anything in payment for this advertisement. But with all that said, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.